Hi, everybody. So we had a little weather event here. It was like a blizzard, and that made the power go out. So we're going to give this a try. We got power again. We're going to record this one, not live, and you'll get the video.
Yeah, we're just going to go replay only on this bad boy. Let's just jump right into it. Today's masterclass is on the art of feel. We're going to talk about bits and aids and more. And for those of you that joined other classes, we started out with anxiety and how to manage it, and viewing anxiety as a potential superpower, exploring some of the magic that happens when you combine mindfulness practices with horsemanship. After that, we went to understanding our horses, and we really explored that through the lens of culture and language. We used the analogy that if you were to visit another country, you wouldn't just expect everybody there to get you and be able to connect with you unless you're willing to meet them at their level within the context of their culture and their language, and how important that actually is with horses. Today, we're going to go into the art of feel, and our last class next week is embodied riding. So the intention with this is we're covering what we call our journey framework. It's something that people who have done our mentorship programs are really familiar with. We have 7 stages, JOURNEY, and it's an intentional, progressive, experiential curriculum to help take you through this way of looking at horsemanship. I'm talking a little bit now, but later it'll be all Victoria, because this is really a subject that she has some great nuance on, and I'm excited to share her knowledge with all of you here too. So we call it the art of feel because it really is an art. It's something that's developed, it's something that's cultivated, and keeping with the holistic framework, we will go into some terminology and some history. We'll touch on that a little bit, but we don't want to get in the weeds on just the mechanics of it all. There's lots of information already out there on that. A lot of it's extremely polarizing between disciplines. There's different philosophies. So hopefully after today's class, you'll have context for yourself. So when you hear somebody talking about this, you'll be able to place it within context that makes sense for you and your life and your horse and your goals.
That's going to set it better.
Yeah, and I just wanted to define really quick too what holistic means in our context, because that's a popular word, holistic this, holistic that. So when we talk about holistic horsemanship, what we're really talking about is mind, body, and soul of horse and human, and talking about how those 3 things connect between both species. So in today's talk, going from mechanics, that's the mental component, Victoria will discuss some of the really fine-tuned specifics of how you actually use your hands and your body and your alignment, and how that all is tied in to feel and management of bits and aids. And we're going to talk a lot about stuff that we think is at the soul level, which is really about energy. And that's really the language of horses, and that's really where the art of feel comes alive. So with that, are you ready to...
Yeah, let's talk about the agenda for the talk.
Okay, agenda. Yeah, let me pull up a slide today. Here.
And what Josh is saying about making feel your own, that is exactly right. We're going to talk about feel being connected to our intuition, and that would mean that everybody has a little different feel, but everybody's got it. And so taking the information that we are giving you today is only just a way to help broaden your horizon, open up your lens so that you can start making it your own, this information your own, in your own practice. So feel. We're going to talk about what it is and why it's important. We're going to talk about what happens when we learn how to use it. And I'm not just talking about what happens in terms of our horse's performance or what we were able to accomplish with our horses, but I'm talking about what happens for us internally, how it carries over into other parts of our lives, particularly our relationships with our horses, but of course with humans as well. We're going to talk about how to cultivate our own feel and apply it in our own way to our own practice with our specific horses. We're going to have a discussion of some basic aids including our body aids, including artificial and ancillary aids. We're going to talk about how our aids, our ancillary aids and artificial aids can become extensions of our bodies. And then we're going to just leave the rest up to you. We will look forward to getting some questions that we can answer and keep the conversation going in our Facebook group. So,
right, yeah, and just a quick note on that too, like the whole reason we're doing these is community building, and we're trying to create a discussion around this topic. And something that we've really noticed in the horsemanship world is there tends to be little camps. And this is true for a lot of passions in life. I've seen this in lots of different realms. It's not totally unique to horses. We're trying to break out of that, or if anything, just create our own micro niche of holistic horsemanship where questions are encouraged. Nothing is considered dumb or irrelevant. In fact, usually when we have people who are new to the field, they bring the most interesting questions that everybody else learns the most from. So if you hear something and you're not sure about it, just literally ask. You can send private messages, but even better, just post in the group because everybody else will see and we can answer publicly there and just create a discussion. So
yeah, we want to keep the conversation going.
Yeah. Like we say, the herd is stronger together. You learn better together. Humans operate better in groups. We learn better. They've researched this in like academic settings where learning in small groups and cohorts, everybody has way better outcomes. Like self-paced courses, there's like a 90% of people never finish it, whereas if you do it in a group, over 80% of people do finish it. So it's really dramatic. So let's work together. Today we're going to be sort of teaching at you because this is how it works. It's a masterclass, but it's really to start a conversation. So look forward to hearing your guys' feedback and questions.
So let's get started.
Great. Ready for the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is Wendy Murdoch. She's a riding instructor, has been for, I think, maybe 40 years, close to 40 years. She's a student of Sally Swift, and she's a trained Feldenkrais practitioner.
I'm hoping we can get her on a podcast one of these days. That'd be cool.
She says feel is a matter of paying close attention to oneself as well as the horse, to what is happening in the present moment and acting accordingly. And she's right on. I would just elaborate and say that feel is the ability to operate from pure sensory perception, to engage all of our senses, all senses, in order to work with our horses from an intuitive, direct, definitive knowingness that comes from, somewhere deep inside. I've always thought of feel as my sixth sense. I feel like that's when things are really the most awesome, the most magical when I'm working with my horses, when I'm working from that space. Feel is working from that inner knowing, and it's being in harmony with your intuition. I think the acting on your intuition is the big piece. I think a lot of times we have the feels, we feel something, and then we sort of stuff it down. The operation or acting piece is the most important there, because when we're working with horses, we have to be able to act based on the in the moment information that's relayed by the horse. And that's in order to stay in sync with the horse. Feel is dynamic. So it's not like we're just sitting there feeling stuff. We're feeling and doing and feeling and doing and feeling and doing. And in order to operationalize feel, we really have to be embodied, which is to say that we have to orient our actions around our sensory experience. And like I was saying, we all experience feel. It's our birthright. It's who we are. But for many of us, it is sort of novel. We spend more time in our heads and in our thoughts and in our stories. So we have to recognize that our culture has pushed us to sort of this disembodiment. Our culture tends to encourage us to ignore our bodies, even distrust its signals, because we're bombarded with imagery and messaging that reminds us that our bodies are not parts of ourselves. Instead, we've been conditioned to consider our bodies as objects. Many of us can identify with that. Objects to be controlled or changed or discounted, or worse, especially if your body doesn't fit in the dominant culture's portrayal of what is ideal. And we, can do all sorts of segues here into ableism and racism and homophobia and transphobia and even, we can go off there, but we're going to stay here, and we're going to remember that when our body speaks up, when we feel those tingling sensations of inner knowing, it can be disorienting, and it can even be a little scary.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of the powerful things working with horses, I think, really does with people too, is it helps you learn to develop your sixth sense in a safe environment, because the horses are free of judgment and all this cultural conditioning that has kind of driven down the access to the sixth sense.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the crux. We all have feel. It's in there. It's innate to every one of us, even if it's been stuffed somewhere deep within. We feel the thing. Often we just don't know what to do with it. For example, we're riding along and the horse's back tightens, or the horse's focus gets drawn away outside of the arena. We feel it the moment it happens in our bodies, right? We've all felt that. And then we freeze and get stuck, or we're transported back to a moment in the past when things went really wrong and really bad, like a wreck or an accident. Or we think ahead and try to control what might happen next, or we worry about what might happen next. So all those things take us out of the moment. And many times when we're working with horses, instead of acting in harmony with what we're feeling, we instead react to what we feel. We allow our mind to pull us away from the present moment. We start thinking of that past accident or potential catastrophe, or we start overanalyzing the situation in an attempt to change it or outthink it or control it before it's even happened. And all of those thoughts drown out our inner knowing and make it impossible for us to stay with our horse. This manifests in our body as tension, as tightness, brace, as in gripping with our knees or gripping with our heels. We get off balance. Our movements get fast and quick, like we start jerking on the reins or kicking with our heels. And sometimes we might even freeze up and become immobile and stiff. And add to this a bit or a whip or a spur, or even the rope halter and the lead rope, any manual aids beyond our body, and we have likely amplified the sensory information that we're sending to the horse in that moment. Aids are just extensions of our bodies. So if we're feeling stiff, if we're feeling worried, if we're feeling stuck, that's exactly what the horse is going to feel, and it's often going to be magnified through our aids. So conditions for feel. We need to practice in order to enhance our feel. We need to build affinity and rapport with our horses. We need to practice mindfulness. We're going to talk more about dynamic equanimity. But again, it's not that everything's cool, I don't care about anything, nothing bothers me. It's being in the moment and being able to stay with that horse, acting in the moment with the horse in harmony. That's equanimity. I think of as balance, but I also think of it as harmony. It's not good or bad. It's that place where you're able to find the sweet spot in between, because your movement is dynamic and in the moment. Of course, we need balance and groundedness. This is part of being in our bodies. We can't ask the horse to pack us. We can't ask the horse to trust us if we don't have some balance and some ability to know where our feet are in terms of the earth, right? Orientation to senses, that's the embodiment. Really tuning in to what our bodies, what our senses are telling us about what's going on. Of course, that leads to an independent seat, hands, and aids. That just means being able to control different parts of your body in an articulated way, separate. So like I can have my hands set and not be moving my hands, but my fingers can be moving. That's one example. And then, of course, timing, knowing when to apply the aid, knowing when to take the aid away. Those are really important components of working with your aids. What gets in the way? Feel blockers, I call them. Analytical thinking, like getting in your head is the first way to make sure that you're going to lose your ability to feel what's going on underneath you or at the end of the lead rope or just in the same area of your horse. Self-doubt, tension, any kind of brace or tension in your body. Anytime you use force to get something done with your horse, it may work in the moment. You may get the thing done. You may achieve the objective, but you won't have been able to feel what was going on. Fear, of course, expectations and limiting beliefs. Those are all things that are going to get in the way of your ability to stay in the moment and feel what's going on with your horse. So we come back to mindfulness. We keep coming back again and again to mindfulness. I think that this is a theme that comes up in every masterclass we do, every coaching call we do, every clinic, every lesson, all of our work, my own practice with my own horses. It all comes down to mindfulness. And again, we're talking about the ability to act accordingly and appropriately in the moment based on the information you're getting in that moment in order to maintain that harmony, that equanimity.
Yeah, and I just want to add that mindfulness isn't something you have to have perfected before you start to engage and work with your horse in, developing the art of feel and your sixth sense. It's an active practice. We've seen very master level horsemen and women who are still always seeking, that thing never ends. It's an ever expanding horizon. So wherever you're at now is perfect. Just develop the practice. Absolutely.
And when we talk about equanimity, remember, that's the harmony, that's the balance, that's what we're after here. It's not like achieving perfection. It's not harmony in that everything is rainbows and butterflies. It's in staying in that balance point, and that requires us often to shift and to move back again and then to move forward again. It's an active dance that we're working in. And mindfulness would be not possible if we're working off of reactions. So mindfulness versus reacting based on anything that's happening, but probably mostly negative thoughts. Usually those thoughts are attached to something not in the moment, meaning what happened before, what might happen. And then there's the other sort of opposite of mindfulness. Chris Germer, he's a psychologist who works with Kristen Neff on mindfulness and self-compassion programs. And he talks about the near enemy of mindfulness, which is this thing called complacency. And maybe go back, because I wanted to just finish talking about the sort of the difference between reacting and then inaction. So Chris Germer's premise, complacency, is that inaction based on this sort of self-satisfied sense of security that has no basis on what's really happening in terms of the situation or the circumstances. And this picture here, I think, says it all. We've got a horse that is clearly distressed, that is clearly in brace and tension, that is clearly not okay with what's happening. But the complacent way to deal with this situation is to add all these artificial aids and to force the horse back into whatever the goal goal is for that situation. And again, it's not acting based on what is going on with the horse. It's acting based on what you just think you know to be correct. And that's the self-satisfied piece. And I thought this was a beautiful sort of and horrific example of that. And again, just going back to what Chris Germer said, complacency pretends to be mindfulness. So it's a little bit scary. Again, this picture I added of this dressage horse sort of demonstrates to me an example of complacency with our horses. So this horse is like doing the opposite of softness, of lightness. But if you look at the rider, this rider is obviously in a competition, showing in dressage, so they've been classically trained. They're obviously very educated. That's what the sort of the garb and the dressage outfit says. It precludes some sort of classically educated understanding of horses. But you look at the horse, it's over bridled. The horse does not look like it's having any fun. And so this is what we're talking about. And you can see where there's no compassion and no connection in this relationship between this rider and their horse. So I thought this was a thought-provoking way to look at mindfulness. And we often think of mindfulness, especially with horses, in like, well, don't react. Well, that's the easy one. That's the far enemy. We know that's the opposite of mindfulness. But this near enemy can be a little more insidious, and I think we see a lot of complacency in many people's riding practices.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really powerful way to look at it because it is such a dynamic thing. The practice of mindfulness is a dynamic practice. The practice of any fine art is very dynamic. And of course, the practice of horsemanship is extremely dynamic because it's not just you practicing your art, it's you interacting with another living being who has its own set of variables, and the environment around you has its own set of variables. So there's so much going on in every moment. And I love how Chris Germer has defined some of these things and helped us kind of delineate some of the layers to this complexity and use our own language, which is really a key that helps us understand and unlock things, is to actually use language. So I think that's awesome. I wonder too, we didn't really talk about this, but complacency, another form of that, maybe complacency isn't actually even the right word, but when you're not really sure what to do, and that leads to inaction too. A lot of people, I think, can relate to that. Like, you're just not quite sure, so you kind of stop and wait to see, and you lose connection and that dynamic sense of feel in that way of stopping too.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, it's not staying in the moment. It's not staying active.
Yeah. It's all about mindfulness. Okay, you ready for the next one?
Yeah, so let's talk about some artificial aids, because since we're on this sort of complacency route, I think aids that often help create a culture of complacency in your riding practice are listed here. And these are not necessarily all inherently bad aids at all. But I do think that a lot of times, rather than tune in, we employ these different artificial aids. And again, they're not all inherently bad. We've got stronger bits. We've got spurs, for example. When used by someone who is highly trained, riding a highly trained horse, spurs are not always abusive. They can actually be tools for clearer, more concise communication. However, very few people who use spurs are highly trained or have been schooled in how to use their spurs properly. And I would also say the more I've learned, and I'm getting over 25 years now of studying and learning and training myself, and the more I learn, the less I have use for some of these tools that I actually did learn how to use most of them properly and ethically and responsibly and compassionately and sparingly. But again, the more I learn, the farther I get on this journey, the less I need these things. So I think that's noteworthy. I think that most of the time, the aids on this list, including spurs, are a sort of a crutch or a signal that we have abandoned our feel. Usually that's in an effort to move faster in the training process, skip steps. Often you see these aids as a form of punishment. They're used to assert dominance and control over the horse, or even just flat out inflict pain. Often they're a way to force the horse to do something, force them into a frame, force them forward, force them to comply. And that usually means that they are making up for our own lack of knowledge or our own lack of understanding, our own lack of timing, our own lack of balance, you name it. Usually it can go back to they are a gimmick that we riders employ to sort of make up for the things that we just haven't achieved yet in our own abilities.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what we were talking about in the beginning, where we said that there's a lot of polarization and misunderstanding. We've learned, that if somebody just labels something as a real black and white, good or bad, that raises a lot of alarm bells because there's just so much nuance. There's so much paradox in this kind of subject. And I think it's worth noting too, like Victoria did, not only did she start as a young kid with horses, but she went through a traditional apprenticeship model based on a very old lineage of horsemanship. We're talking tens of thousands of hours just at that level, 16-hour days over years. This is really rare today. In a lot of great arts, if traditionally there's two ways that you really would learn horsemanship. One is if you were just born into that culture, like indigenous cultures are literally surrounded by horses and they're just integrate them into their life and they're born and raised and learning how to interact and communicate. And then the other is through traditional apprenticeship models, and that requires years of dedication, usually for little to no money. So it's just very impractical in today's society to do that. And again, if you were taught properly, all those tools we just showed can be used beautifully. If you're not taught properly, they can be used really horribly. So, it's all context and nuance, and it's understanding the perspective and where things fit into history and personal use and circumstance. So that's just really important. It's also why we really believe in just the power of mentorship and community, and lacking these indigenous traditions or traditional apprenticeship models where you're brought up in a classical system that's been trained for hundreds and hundreds of years. What can we do? I think seeking mentorship and a learning community, it's two of the things that we've come up with.
No judgment either.
Zero judgment.
The thing with all this stuff is when you know better, you do better. And so the spirit of this class, and that's not my quote, that's the amazing, fabulous, omnipresent Maya Angelou. So I just want to make sure she gets the credit. But it's true. When you know how some of these things work, when you know how to employ your own feel, you start to ask better questions. You start to do better and do right by your horse. And again, we're all on a journey. So this is not a judgment. If you use any of these things, I have used all of these aids at one point or another. And I've used them sometimes completely incorrectly, and I've used them sometimes exactly the way they were designed to be used. And those moments where I did each of those things, that's where I was in my journey. So no judgment. We've all been there. We're all trying to do the best we can. And so hopefully that's the spirit of this class, is just to give you a little more information so that you can continue to do the best you can, and it can actually get better.
Yeah, I love that. That quote is so powerful. And she's also the one who said, people don't remember what you said or what you do. They remember
How you made them feel.
How you made them feel. It's kind of a fitting, I guess, for our
Yeah,
talk today,
that's
talking about feel.
Right.
The beauty with horses is they're incredibly forgiving. They're incredibly in the moment. They're always there kind of waiting for you on the other side of that door. So when you do learn better and then do better, they're just there waiting for you. And it's really cool. And they're very forgiving, very non-judgmental, just really wonderful to work with.
Yeah. So
moving
onward.
on. Okay.
So here's a list of some of our natural aids, and these are where we should begin. Our natural aids should be where we center our horsemanship practice, and we really ought to work at mastering these before we add some of those artificial aids or ancillary aids that we're going to talk about in a minute. You really want to get control of your body because, like I said earlier, the ancillary aids, supportive aids, bits, whips, all the things, they're just going to amplify what your body is doing. So it's really important to have some awareness of what your body is doing before you add these other aids, especially when you're adding speed or like trying something new. And the thing is, there's a lot of work to be done here. Like this is, to me, this is the work. It's very rich. And when you approach it like this, it can become sort of an embodiment practice. It's, to me, almost like my active meditation when I'm working with my horses. It's how I really get in my body and become mindful. So it's not like I always show up in that space, although I try to. But as I start to work with my horses and think about my body language, my energy, get as minute as my facial expressions and my breath, my hands, my fingers, my seat, all those things, that is my active meditation. And so in terms of body language, it should be grounded and clear and relaxed. And that's just to start. We can get heavy into that. We know our horses communicate almost all through body language. So it's really important that we've got a handle on what we're saying with our bodies. Remember, we're connecting our body parts to our horses' corresponding body parts in a way that our horses will start to mirror us. So this is where body language becomes really important. Of course, our energy, it needs to be very direct and clear also. It needs to be attuned with the horse and the environment, and that can be tricky. That's a whole practice in of itself, is getting clear and attuned in your energy, being able to direct energy where you want it to go and nowhere else. These are the ways we communicate with our horses, and these are the ways they appreciate. In terms of our head and our facial expressions, we should be relaxed. Our head should be sort of angled off of our spine in the same angle that we want our horse's neck and head to be. Like we're asking for our horses usually to be on the bit. So if we hold our posture that way, that helps. We're asking for our horses to be soft and relaxed and even kind of happy about what they're doing. So it's really important that we've got maybe a soft expression. Even a smile is helpful. And not a maniacal, crazy smile, like a nice, pleasant, like I'm enjoying what I'm doing smile, mouth slightly open so you can, maybe even breathe a little bit so your mouth isn't, or your jaw isn't clenched, that type of thing. Then, of course, your hands should be set. They shouldn't move, but your fingers should move. So getting to the point where you can set your hands and they're not going to move, but you can keep your fingers feely. I say your fingers should be sort of fishing, or even like playing the reins like piano keys. The idea is that your fingers are giving and taking, and that they're playing. But your hands are independent of that. Your hands are independent of your seat. They're independent of your arms and your shoulders. Your hands are their own entity, and they stay in one spot. Of course, our seat should be independent, so our balance doesn't depend on our hands or our knees or our legs or anything else. Our hips should be rocking and communicating. So we're not just like rocking our hips or tucking our pelvis for the sake of tucking our pelvis. We're doing it in an intuitive and a feely way that is engaged with our horse's hips and sort of operating from a place of adjusting based on what our horse's hips feel like and what we would like our horse's hips to do. Which, again, if we're going back to collection and having the horse on the bit, we want our horse's hips tucked up underneath them. We want our horse balancing from their hips. So their hocks are driven deep up underneath their belly, and most of their balance is oriented over their hips. If we are riding that way, it's going to be much easier for our horses to move that way, especially when they're packing us. Our legs should be soft and relaxed. I think of just having a light bear hug around my horse's rib cage when I'm riding. So I want my horse to feel my legs. I want those to be points of connection and energy, but I never want to be gripping or holding on with my knees or any part of my legs. Your feet, even though your heel should be down, it shouldn't be so tightly pushed to the earth that you've got tension in your calf or anywhere in your leg. I think about sort of reaching underneath my horse's belly with my heels, and that feels kind of natural for me. Your eyes should be soft and open so that you can see peripherally as you can. So your eyesight and your perspective is maybe a little bit more like your horse's. But again, you've got that soft sort of panoramic view of things, which is going to just give you a better vantage point when you're riding or just working with your horse on the ground as well. And then, of course, your voice. So calm, soothing words. Some people use voice commands. That's not how I roll, but however you use your voice, it should be in a way that keeps the nervous system regulating, keeps things working smoothly, and we're not activating any fight or flight or freeze response in our bodies or our horses' bodies.
Yeah, wonderful. And in next week's class on embodied riding, we're going to go into some more exercises, some body awareness activities, some grounding exercises. We'll talk a little bit about how the nervous system interfaces with this. We'll even probably go a little bit into the polyvagal theory of co-regulation.
Yeah, and the trickiest part of mastering your natural aids is the separating them out part, so that you can articulate the aid independent of the rest. So I can use my hands independent of my fingers, like I said before. My hands are independent of my seat. The way I use my feet is completely independent of my seat. And I think of it like this. This is how I think of it, this little quote. You're the fulcrum asking your horse to orbit around you. And if we're using the dance metaphor, someone has to lead. So you set your body and you set your hands, and then you allow your horse to sort of tune into that. If your hands are moving around, your horse doesn't know where to be. It's confusing, it's off-putting and disorienting for your horse and for you. So these are just a couple of the things to think about with our body cues. Again, we're going to do a master class on embodied riding next week, so we'll get deeper into that. Our ancillary aids, or the aids that we use to enhance our natural aids or support our natural aids, are really common, right? Like, here's a list. We've got the snaffle bit. Many of us use a snaffle bit or curb bits. The boselle or the hackamore. Of course, our reins are a supportive aid. The lunge line and the whip, the halter and lead rope, the dressage whip, even a nose band. These are all part of what we all use. These are common, and we're going to get into the details of them. I added integrity as part of our ancillary aids because I think any aid can be used in an abusive manner, including our natural aids. Misplaced energy or disorganized thoughts coming from a handler can totally traumatize the horse and set the tone for a not a good session for either the horse or the human. Gripping or kicking with your heels into the horse's rib cage is totally unfair, and I have seen that be a lot more painful when I see somebody kicking the horse in the belly with a boot with no spurs than a perfectly applied spur. So we need to be aware of how we're using our natural aids just as much as we do with our ancillary or supportive or unnatural aids. And the case of integrity is for the integrated self. So that means that our insides match our outsides. And again, we're kind of circling back to the way feel works, right? When our intentions and our values are aligned with our riding practice or our horsemanship practice, that keeps us working with our horses in a compassionate, congruent framework. And that's going to keep us in that space where we start to utilize our internal feel.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, this is really the heart and soul of, the art of feel, is it really does come down to this. And in the first 3 weeks of our mentorship program, we start that with a practice called Journey to Why. And it's all about discovering your North Star that guides you. It's about digging down to that bedrock about why are you even interested in learning about feel or working with horses and all of that. And generally speaking, everybody that comes to us has this really beautiful intention at the root of everything. It's tear evoking, just beautifully profound stories. So find that and go there, and your horse feels the difference.
Yeah, we've talked about all sorts of ways that the horse feels that in their nervous system. We've talked about heart coherence. We won't get into that today because we've done a masterclass on that. We've got other lessons on that. But there is some truth to that, and it's beyond just like anecdotally what we know. There is science that is showing us that what we feel matters, and it matters to our horses a lot. So let's get into some of the common aids that we might use ourselves. Okay. We're going to start with the smooth ring snaffle. I thought it would be helpful to go through some of these common aids to talk about exactly how they work, so you have a better understanding of what your horse is feeling, so that when you use them, you're more educated in how you use them. So snaffles are a direct rein bit. They have a 1-to-1 leverage ratio, meaning they aren't a leverage bit. There is no leverage. The idea is that for every pound of pressure that you put on the snaffle through your draw of the reins, the horse is going to feel 1 pound of pressure. So it's equal. It's a direct rein pull. Full functions through, again, drawing the horse from their chin area. It's going to work on the bars of their mouth, and it's going to be helpful in teaching the horse to follow her nose. It's good for bending and suppling. It's good for teaching softness in our own hands and the horse's face. It, again, works on the bars of the horse's mouth, but it also lays on the horse's tongue in terms of the mouthpiece. So if we look at the mouthpiece here, it's going to be laying right on the horse's tongue. A lot of people think that the snaffle is just super mild and it's never going to hurt the horse. You see how it's jointed in the middle, and if you start seesawing on either side of the horse's mouth, that's going to create a scissor action on the horse's tongue. And I have seen loads of very abusive riding in the snaffle over the years that, is definitely causing the horse distress. So it's a little bit of a myth when everybody says, well, I ride in the snaffle because it's so benign. The snaffle can absolutely be a tool for abuse, not when it's used properly, like most of these tools. So next we have the hackamore or boselle. This is a no-bit situation. This is obviously no leverage. Unless you're talking about a mechanical hackamore, those are the ones that have metal, or you'll see shanks and a curb strap. There's all different manners of those. Never use a mechanical hackamore. Never use any hackamore that has a curb strap or a chin strap on it of any kind, anything that goes under the jaw, and anything that has shanks, that actually creates a vise on the jaw, and it can be not only very painful, but it can actually cause damage to your horse's jaw. So again, I see people using hackamores sometimes as a means to be more gentle or more compassionate toward their horses, which is wonderful. But sometimes the hackamore that you're using might actually be more abusive and cause more damage than a regular bit. So stick with soft hackamores, stick with Bosel hackamores that have a natural nose piece, and go from there. Hackamores were traditionally used to allow a horse's mouth to mature for their 4 and 5-year-old year, sometimes even their 6-year-old year. So if you started the horse traditionally in the snaffle bit, if you're following a vaquero style reined cow horse training system, you start with a snaffle, and then that's like the 2 and 3-year-old year. And then the 4, 5, and 6-year-old year is the hackamore to allow the horse's mouth to mature and change. And it also creates the ability to start just working the horse off the neck rein. And that's a whole nother discussion. But again, it is used in conjunction with bits usually. It's a way to enhance your training process. And again, just assuming that it can't cause the horse discomfort because it doesn't have a bit is not true. So just wanted to
a really powerful context for
put
both.
That out there.
Yeah, for both the hackamore and the snaffle, it's just really important to know. It's not black and white. It's what we kind of keep bringing up in this. There's a lot of nuance, and it's really important that you get the right information from the right source, because there is a really powerful and time-tested tradition that's evolved for, in some cases, thousands of years.
And to use the hackamore properly, you really do have to have pretty good control of your body cues. I mean, you really are going to be communicating more through the body, and it's a way to sort of let the horse's neck and jaw relax while you're communicating with the rest of the horse's body. So there's just a lot to it, and I highly recommend adding a soft hackamore to your training gear and giving it a try. But it's one of those things that's got to be used in conjunction with all the other aids, including your body, maybe adding a snaffle in here or there. Like, it's a whole process. So next we have the curb bit, and this is another one that sort of most of us employ when we're working with our horses. And the curb bit is basically signified by shanks and a curb strap or chin strap. And so you can see on this picture, there is a chin strap. It's a leather chin strap behind the mouthpiece. And then the shanks are the parts of the bit that hang below the bit. And that's where the reins connect to. And so the idea with a shanked port curb bit is that it has leverage, right? So the leverage is what makes it so that you use less rein pressure. And this is something to keep in mind when you're using a curb bit. The whole point is that you're, again, elevating your horsemanship practice to the point where you don't have to employ the bit as much. When we were in the snaffle, we're using direct rein pressure. We're asking the horse to follow the direct draw of the reins through the snaffle and the pressure on the bars of their mouth and the side of their face. In the curb bit, we're looking at leverage. We're looking at how this action of the leverage asks the horse to soften in their poll and through their whole face down to their chin. And so it's really important to know that the whole point is to not pull on it, is to not use it much. It should sit there and just be used very lightly and very sparingly. A word on leverage, you can start to understand the amount of leverage that your your shank bit has by understanding the ratios. And the way you understand the ratio of a leverage bit is the length of the purchase, which is the part of the bit that starts at the mouthpiece and goes up to where the head stall meets the bit. And then you measure that against the shank, which is the part of the bit or the shank that's measured below the bit. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Okay.
Yeah, I'm tracking.
Good. And so if you measure the length of the shank and get say it's 2 inches, and you measure the purchase and that's 1 inch, then you've got a 1-to-2 ratio of leverage. And that means for every 1 pound of pressure you put on the bit through the bridle reins, your horse is going to feel 2 pounds of pressure. And the longer the shank, typically the more leverage. So if it's a 5-inch shank and a 1-inch purchase, that's going to be 5 pounds of pressure that the horse is going to feel for every 1 pound the rider's hands put through the reins to the bit. So that's a little bit about leverage, and I think that is helpful when we're talking about understanding how these bits work. Mm-hmm. Now, the purchase, that part above the actual mouthpiece or the actual port, is what allows the curb bit to stay steady. It kind of keeps the bit fixed in place. And some horses really like that because, again, the snaffle sort of just like rolls around on the horse's tongue and kind of moves a lot. The curb bit usually acts in a more fixed way, so the horse can just kind of knows where it is and can work within those parameters more easily. Sometimes I've found that snaffles can be sort of numbing over time to horses because they're just like all this kind of white noise happening through the reins in the snaffle, whereas a curb bit, there's less there moving around. It's going to be sending less sort of superfluous information to the horse through the reins. The other thing to know about the shanks is that the longer they are, usually the more assertive the bit is going to be. So again, it takes less rein to put more pressure on the horse's face. But the other thing to know is that the angle of the shank plays a really important part. The steeper the angle, the straighter the shank is, the quicker the horse is going to feel information through the reins from the rider's hands. The more sloping or swept back the shank is, the less assertive the bit is going to be. And you can sort of even measure your leverage ratio based on where the bit starts to angle, where the shank starts to angle away from that straight, steeper angle. So I'm just looking at my notes here. The angled or swept back shank, on the other hand, allows more incremental signal for the horse before the bit is engaged, because the rider has to draw more rein before the bit is engaged. That's what I'm trying to say there. Mm-hmm. The other thing about your curb bits, a lot of them swivel and move around and are jointed. That, again, just changes the way the curb bit feels in your hands and to your horse. And those of you who have ever gone bit shopping, especially for a curb bit, know that there's like 8 billion different variations of curb bits, and every horse is a little different and every bit is a little different. So you really have to get to where you know your horse, you know your hands, you know how you ride, and you know what it is you're trying to communicate. And then having a little bit of knowledge of the way these bits basically work can help you make the right choice when it comes to choosing the bit. And then, of course, your horse will tell you. A lot of times I'll try a bit on a horse and it just doesn't work because I can just tell the horse doesn't care for it. A couple other things about curb bits that I think are really great. Usually curb bits have a lifted port, so the part in the middle of the mouthpiece offers some tongue relief for the horse. sometimes that's kind of nice for the horse. Again, that fixed purchase, keeping the bit in one spot, and then the port, allowing some tongue relief, makes it so your horse maybe might be more comfortable packing a bit in general. The other thing to know about a port, the higher the port, the more palate pressure it's going to put on your horse. So again, knowing how your horse's mouth is structured, are they a little narrower? Are they a little wider? Are they very sensitive in their palate? That's going to determine the height of your port. And again, I think I'm just scratching the surface with curb bits. I could do an 8-part series on curb bits. I have a whole tack room full of different variations of ported bits. I use very few of them anymore because I mostly work in the snaffle or even with no bit, but they are made for a reason and very specifically made for very specific reasons. So, hopefully this is a little information to help you narrow down where to even start with your horse and how to use the bit that you have properly, so that you're actually hopefully enhancing your communication instead of creating those blocks that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. It really just speaks to the importance of asking questions too, talking things through. Always consider yourself a student of the horse, a student of the art. A lot of these things have been manufactured and adopted over centuries now. So there's so much that goes into it. And that was a lot, actually. Like if you're actually shopping for something, you could probably rewind and take notes. And that was actually a lot of information. So the fact that was only just scratching the surface shows just how deep the well really goes. And it's important to have a community you can bounce questions off of. It's important to have mentors that really understand and that you can trust to give you right advice, because it's totally variable. It depends on you, your horse, even the structure of their mouth, where they're at in training, their exposure to different training tools over the years, your skill level. There's so many variables.
Well, and I think most of the time, the reason why people use a curb bit or even maybe a more assertive snaffle, maybe a snaffle that has a little shank on it, or a snaffle that has a different mouthpiece, maybe a twist in it, is because they're looking for more control. But if you don't understand how the bit is creating that, I think sometimes it actually will work against you. So I think understanding bits is a big deal, and it also creates this awareness around how to use them properly, or, oh shoot, I probably shouldn't be using this bit at all. And especially when we're talking about collection and we're talking about like kind of what we're all after is that feeling of roundness underneath us, that feeling of balance through our horse's body that comes from that rearward placement of their balance and movement and impulsion coming from the rear. But of course, it has to be happening through a soft and on the bit face. We tend to sort of force our horses into these frames with these bits, and especially with port bits, because the way they operate, the leverage usually creates a situation where the horse breaks at the pole and does get vertical in the bridle and does get quote unquote on the bit. But if it's being done without feel, if you're not exercising the correct knowledge around how to use that bit, it's going to create stiffness and brace. And that is going to create artificial headsets and an unhappy horse.
Yeah, really good points. And it's interesting that horses like to be naturally collected. So it's really a bummer that becomes like a force thing through tools and aids and all of that stuff, because it's really, it's kind of going through what is already a natural instinct, and it's mowing over that and not allowing that full expression. And it's really a beautiful thing with horsemanship as you become more clear in your intention, as you align your thoughts, your actions, and your deeds, and your congruency, as you learn and connect with the horse. You're also able to just experience and allow the horse's natural tendencies to come out, and you're both just becoming better versions of yourselves.
Yeah, a lot of times our horses don't want to be collected under us, or if we're working in hand, in the in-hand work, because they don't trust that we can stick with them when they're really collected. When you see your horses playing out in the pen or running around in the arena at Liberty, and you see them naturally do all those fancy airs above the ground and sort of, for lack of a better word, dressage or even reining maneuvers, they're doing those because that's how they naturally go. And so if we can figure out how to harness that without sort of squashing it, I think that's what we're after.
Yeah, I wonder if we have an image of this expression in its kind of most highest perfection that we could share with our audience.
We do.
We do.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is one of our heroes.
Absolutely. This is the great Dominique Barbier in full fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a beautiful picture in terms of somebody riding in perfect equitation. And if you see the way the horse is moving in perfect harmony and balance and collection, that's what we're talking about, right? And if you notice, the reins are nearly slack. He's got a double bridle on. So again, there's an example of a pretty serious bridle. Like, there's a lot of leverage there. There's a lot going on. It's got a snaffle and a curb. It's considered a high school level bridle for horses. And yet Dominique is not employing the tight reins that we saw in the earlier pictures of dressage riders. And yet his body is communicating to the horse how best to move in that moment that they're dancing together. I use this photo also for the reins part of this class because it's just an expertly depicted use of reins. Again, he's got 2 sets of reins, so he's got 4 reins to manage, and he is doing it beautifully. His hands are set, his hands are quiet, and he is not using his hands to balance his body. His hands are completely independent of his body, and you can see that through his use of the reins. They're loose, the horse is in self-carriage, and the horse is in perfect collection.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So
beautiful. Be sure and look for his books. Dominique Barbier, wonderful teacher, wonderful writer, wonderful human being.
Yeah, his books will blow your mind at whatever part of your journey you're on. And to me, they're kind of like any kind of sacred text. You can open it at any time of your life, in any moment, in any page, just like I just will open it up sometimes and read a couple paragraphs, and it's always helpful and always illuminating. So a word on hands, they should be independent like we talked. They should be in front of your saddle. They should be below the pommel of your saddle, in front of it, thinking like down where your saddle pad is or where your horse's withers are. I think of putting a 4-inch box around the outside of where I have my hand set, and I try not to move outside of that box. So 4 inches around where each hand is set, and that's where your hands stay. Of course, then your active fingers are happening. Your fingers are moving. They're doing the give and take. They're doing the talking, a lot of talking. And I think about my reins being alive with energy. Again, I'm trying to only send meaningful, important communication through my reins. So I'm not just blindly doing the sort of, well, you see it a lot, the seesawing, the back and forth. I'm talking to the horse through my fingers, and based on what the horse is telling me in their face through the reins, that determines what my fingers will do next. And it's an active, dynamic practice. Let's see. We got one more thing on hands here.
Okay.
This is something that Josh pointed out that we talked about at the last clinic. I said people think that having good hands means not using your hands. Not correct. Good hands say a lot in 3 seconds. It means having a dynamic conversation with the horse through your hands and never startling the horse. And that's good hands. Being able to communicate information, being able to say a lot without ever scaring or surprising your horse. So this is no jerking. Never be quick. Never take the slack out of the reins suddenly. That's unfair. The horse has no warning, no heads up that you're going to be talking to their face. Everything should be pretty slow motion, but active, not slow motion for the sake of being slow motion because that's what it takes to convey what you're trying to say through the reins. Never jerk.
That's great. It makes me think of the point you made at the beginning of the presentation about complacency, and that good, quiet hands are not complacent hands. They are active and dynamic. Doesn't mean they're visibly moving all over the place, but they're active and dynamic because they're feeling.
Exactly. And just keeping your hands so light and so like not saying anything for the sake of having soft hands doesn't get anything done either. So again, it's just that being in the moment and reading the situation based on what's happening. And this is where we move into, we went to halter and lead rope and the lunge line and the lunge whip. Basically, you're on the ground aids, some of your on the ground aids. These I think of as conduits for energy and sort of lines of communication. Your halter should fit snugly. I don't know how many times I see like the offside halter in the horse's eyeball for students. Like that's just a bummer for the horse. Like that would be very uncomfortable to have to deal with that. And it would be, to me, very hard to concentrate on what somebody's saying if I have something like in my eye.
And we teach an exercise in the second week of the program called mindful grooming, and that applies to putting the halter on too. And there's, again, and no shame in any of this. It's just we've seen people that have ridden for 20, 30 years that still don't put it on correctly, and there's a really simple way to do it. You do that, and mindfulness in this case isn't so much even about correct technique. It's just thinking about how it feels to the horse. If it's got a halter that's kind of coming over its eye, that's going to be really uncomfortable. So
exactly,
just being mindful and considerate and careful, and part of that just is as simple as moving a little slower.
Yeah, noticing what's the horse's experience is as we're working on the ground and using some of these ground aids. I think, again, the inclination is to consider the halter totally benign, or consider the lead rope like supernatural and super relaxed, so it'll never cause the horse harm or discomfort. And that just is not correct. We know that anything that we are transmitting in our bodies is going to go right through the lead rope. It's going to go right through the lunge line and say a lot to our horse. So we really need to practice being careful about the energy we're sending through those lines. I literally think of them in my mind. I visualize them as energy conduits, and it's my responsibility to make sure whatever I'm sending through that conduit is what I want the horse to know, is what I want the horse to learn about what we're doing. And that means no white noise. That means no yelling in terms of like jerking or anything like that. So also, I think it's important to note that it takes a while to get handy with your long lines or your lunge lines or your longer lead ropes. It takes a lot of practice. And so uncoiling and recoiling and uncoiling and recoiling, keeping all twists or knots out of your lead ropes and lunge lines especially is incredibly important. And it's also part of that practice that will increase your skill level with the lines. uncoiling and resetting and untwisting and resetting and recoiling. That is what gets you good at handling those long lines and those long lead ropes that can be a little cumbersome. Not letting them get down by your feet, not letting yourself get disorganized. Work with a shorter lead until you feel proficient, and then work longer and longer.
Yeah, that's great advice, because I don't have the hours that Victoria has, and it's so awkward when you're trying to navigate this rope while giving your attention to the horse and trying to transmit energy and feel. So that just that tip right there to just start with a shorter one, get a little more handy, and then add in some length as you go. The simple tips work the best.
Yeah. And then the lunge whip, again, I think of this as an extension of my body when I'm using it. I think of it again as a way to transmit energy and emotion and intention. I often think about it like my horse's tail. Like, to me, it gives me just that little bit of something that makes me seem slightly more horse-like to my horse, which usually cultivates some curiosity in my horse, but also lets them know that I am trying to communicate on their level. When I swish the lunge whip in a certain way, kind of like that tail swish, and it's saying, hey, let's get moving, to me, that tells my horse that I am doing my best to communicate the way they communicate. And I will see them mirror that back to me, usually. So being really clear with your lunge whip and making sure that when you're trying not to use it, you're not using it. So one tip I give students is to put the tip of your lunge whip in the dirt, like still hold the handle, but have it a position so that the tip is down in the dirt. So you're not sending energy at that horse when you're not wanting to.
Yeah, it's a wonderful tip. It's like you literally imagine energy is coming out of the lunge whip. So even if it's up in the air, the horse kind of senses energy. So that tip of putting it into the ground just kind of grounds the energy. So it's the horse won't feel it.
I am not a fan of cracking the whip. That is not something that I do on purpose. Once in a while it might happen accidentally, but that is not the way I use the lunge whip. I obviously never want to whip the horse with it. A lot of times I'll go back and sort of groom the horse with it a little bit and touch the horse all over, just to make sure that there is no fear or tension around the lunge whip. I don't want the horse to be ever afraid of the whip, I never want to use the lunge whip especially, as a tool to make the horse go faster. It's really not that. It's a way to, again, harness and direct energy.
Great.
I think the next one, just again, a little bit on whips. We've got the dressage whip. Again, same as the lunge whip. It's just an energy conductor. It can be used in hand or riding, and it's used to drive energy. Again, we're never going to whip the horse with it. You're never going to hit the horse with it. That's not ever going to be an appropriate use of the whip. It is used to sometimes drive energy from the horse's inside hind leg to their outside front. Again, it's a way to articulate your cue in a way that's more clear to the horse. One way that when you drive a little more energy at that inside hind leg and it drives up into the diagonal outside front part of the horse will start to bend sort of naturally, and that's before you've ever pulled on the reins or touched the reins. So the whip can be used to help the horse put their body in a position that is where we are trying to get to without using other ways that we typically do, like setting a frame with our hands and the bridle, for example.
Yeah, and a sensitive use of these tools, it really is a way of honoring the sensitivity of the horse itself. Not only are the horse's senses so fine-tuned, sight, smell, hearing, all that stuff, so far superior to our own that we can't really even relate, but their skin, their entire body has the same tactile sensitivity as the tip of our fingers. And then, another layer to that is their nervous system is so refined, so fine-tuned, so highly sensitive. So this kind of careful, thoughtful use of tools as energy conductors is really honoring the horse's sensitivity. And, they feel seen, they feel heard when you recognize that and meet them at that level. And then you're able to connect with the horse on their level, which is really what we're all after.
And it works both ways, just like you would never use the whip in an aggressive way, like hit the horse or whip the horse with the whip. You also don't want to be numbing the horse to the whip. You don't want to be nagging them or like kind of using it accidentally, kind of always just like brushing them with it and touching them with it without noticing that's what you're doing, because again, that's going to cause the horse to just start ignoring you because it's just so darn annoying. So this mindfulness practice around our aids works on both ends of the spectrum in terms of communication. I love this photo. I just wanted to talk about how our horses exist on the sensory plane, right? And we can accomplish a lot with them when we tune in to that plane. Our horses are naturally embodied. So it makes sense that our senses, our body, is our best tool for communicating with them. And you see that in some of this bridleless riding, especially when it's done in softness and lightness without some of the sort of gimmicks that we've been talking about. And it's important to remember that any tightness or tension in our bodies, or lack thereof, when there's no tightness or tension, that's the information that the horse is using to make sense of what's happening. So that's up to us. We can either employ tension and brace through our bodies, or we can work on having our horse be in relaxation and movement being free and dynamic and full of expression, full of the horse's natural expression. Because the horse, our partner, reflects what we're transmitting through our bodies. And that is true right down to the emotions. So is your horse feeling joy from you when you're riding, or are they feeling fear? And they will absolutely mirror that back to us. Is the horse feeling freedom, or are they feeling pain? These are the questions that we have to make sure that we are asking ourselves when we're riding. And again, it can get right down to that emotional level. And this is where we circle back to intuition. So what is your inner knowing telling you? We just did a lesson last week with our winter cohort saying all around, what does the mirror say? Like when you have a question before you ask your instructor, just take a check-in with your inner knowing. What is it telling you? What do you really know about what's happening with you and your horse? And a lot of times the answer is right there. What your inner knowing is telling you is usually what your horse is trying to tell you. And that truth can help you advocate for your horse in a way that is really meaningful and actually helpful to your horse. And, it's a win-win, because when we employ our intention and our intuition in our riding practice, we learn more about ourselves, and that helps us return to our bodies. And that's where this reciprocal loop of embodiment and feeling the feel and knowing how to work with the feel in harmony with the feel starts to seep into the rest of our lives as well, which is why horses are so good for us. It's why we're drawn to horses. It's how horses heal us. They remind us who we really are, and they show us the way to the place where who we are is the only version that matters.
Boom. Beautiful.
I love it, right?
Yeah.
It's the stuff.
Awesome stuff. It's what we're all here to share in. It's an incredible path. It's an incredible art. It's an incredible passion. It's something that we're here in community to share together over, because it's just a wonderful thing. We're really lucky to be able to do that. I hope this was helpful for y'all. It was a little weird for us. We usually do this live with a room full of people on our Zoom that we can see and talk to and ask questions of. So we won't be able to do the Q&A today. Just shoot us some questions over this, because this is a topic that is really meaty, and there's a lot of, I think, questions that will come out of it because it's so nuanced for you and your unique situation, your level, your horse, your exposure to information. And just never be shy to ask questions. Lean into the power of beginner's mind. It really is where all possibility exists. We're quoting beginner's mind concept from Shunryu Suzuki. And we think that's really key for everything with horsemanship, is to always have that fresh, original beginner's mind. Never be shy to ask questions. Never be shy to seek information. Just enjoy the journey.
And in fact, when we were putting this class together before we lost our power and the big snowstorm, we had intended to do a lot of Q&A at the end. So no joke, get your questions to us. I sort of came up with this curriculum thinking that it would evoke a lot of questions in the class. And alas, we didn't get to do it live. So if you have questions, please reach out with them.
Okay, may the horse be with you, and we'll see you next time.